But the first, unable to pay the fee, was just kicked out of the hospital. In the square, the host asked Liu Ryan what she felt at that moment. She immediately saw me, a pitiful figure, standing outside the crowd. Her expression froze for a long time. Then, suddenly, she walked toward me. She placed the microphone right at my lips. Back then, you ran away from marriage because my family went bankrupt, heartlessly leaving me behind. Now you suddenly appear here. Are you regretting it? I instinctively rubbed my prosthetic right leg, forced a bitter smile, and said, "Yes, I regret it. Liu, well, we once loved each other. Could you give me a job? Even if it's just odd jobs, I'm fine with it." But Liu Ryan's face instantly turned cold. She turned around and left, but she didn't know. When the Liu family went bankrupt, and when she was kidnapped by her enemies, they demanded she give up a leg. It was I, secretly, who lost that leg for her. After the opening event ended, I was about to leave, but Liu Ryan stopped me. Years had passed, and your first words to me are this. On her cold, beautiful face, there was a layer of anger hidden. 3 years had passed, and when I saw her again, my heart unexpectedly raced faster. I gazed at her for a long time. 1,000 words surged up, but they turned into a lazy grin. What should I say? Should I just ask you for a little money? Liu Ryan glared at me, her expression changing several times. In the end, she coldly turned her head and said, "You want a job? Fine. I remember you once said your biggest dream was to walk in Milan Fashion Week, to become an international model. Coincidentally, my company is recruiting models. You can." Knowing full well that I'll never walk the runway again, but hearing her words, I couldn't help but imagine myself on the catwalk. My blood began to boil. Suddenly, my right leg burned with intense pain, as though it was still there. My phantom limb pain flared up again. I gritted my teeth, hiding my discomfort. I was about to refuse Liu Ryan when I saw her link arms with a man. Turning around with a smile, "You can be an assistant to the model with a monthly salary of 6,000 and weekends off. I forgot to introduce you. This is my boyfriend, Zhao Ziking. Ching, he picked out your assistant. Go ahead and interview him." At that moment, I couldn't tell if I was disappointed or relieved. I couldn't even distinguish whether it was my leg hurting or the pain in my heart. The saddest part is, Liu Ryan casually threw my humiliating job at me, which was already the highest I could reach at that moment. I need this job to buy medicine to ease the pain in my right leg. I forced a smile at Zhao Ziking. Before I could even speak, a bowl of hot porridge was splashed on my face. Zhao Ziking laughed maliciously, but pretended to be apologetic, saying, "Sorry, I have a bit of a bad temper. I need to test the assistant's character during the interview. You are Ryan's ex-boyfriend. I really should thank you. If you hadn't abandoned Ryan all those years ago for being poor, I wouldn't have met her." He pretended to look at Liu Ryan with sympathy, and she affectionately pinched his cheek. "It's okay. The bad things had to go for the good ones to come. I should thank him for letting me go back then, so I could meet you, my true love." I silently moved away from the light. It was already so tragic. I didn't want to keep watching their perfect love story. But suddenly, Zhao Ziking shoved 100 yuan into my palm. With a look of disgust, "Buy a box of condoms and bring it back. We'll need it later. Don't take offense. Ryan and I are just too in love." Liu Ryan unconsciously glanced at me, wanting to say something but stopped herself. I hurriedly smiled and turned around, fearing that a single second more would reveal the heartache in my expression. Counting the days apart, this was the 8th year I had loved Liu Ryan. We fell in love in college, and I proposed to her when we graduated. At that time, she was still the rich daughter of the Liu family, and I was a promising model who had already walked several major shows at a young age. Everyone thought we would be very happy, until the night before our wedding. When the Liu family suddenly went bankrupt, Liu Ryan's father was hospitalized with heart disease, and the money seemed to flow like water. She worked herself to exhaustion, and I kept walking shows one after another. We lost everything, but we still couldn't fill up these bottomless pits. To make matters worse, Liu Ryan was kidnapped by the Liu family's enemies. When I finally found her, she had already passed out from fear, and the kidnappers said either pay 5 million for her release, or she would lose a leg. When I came back after buying the necessary items, Liu Ryan was kissing Zhao Ziking and urging me to unpack the goods. When I calmly took something out and handed it to her, she frowned instead. She gritted her teeth and glared at me for a long time. With a vicious sigh, she finally said, "Fine, go handle the paperwork for the job." Everything went smoothly with the job application, until I reached the section about physical condition. I hesitated for a long time, but in the end, I checked the box for disability, and in the remarks I wrote, "Right leg amputated. Needs prosthetics for daily life." Liu Ryan stared at the form, her delicate brows knitting tightly. She tapped the table and sneered. "What are you trying to pull now? Lying like this? Do you expect me to feel sorry for you?" "He Zhang, I've already been more than kind by giving you a job. Don't expect more from me." Zhao Ziking, however, deliberately wiped the corner of his eye. "Ryan, don't be like this. What if He Zhang really has had his leg amputated? How pitiful. Why don't we do this? Let me test it, and we'll know if it's true or not." As he spoke, he suddenly threw the boiling water directly onto my right leg, and then began kicking me with his leather shoes. The silent office echoed with dull thuds. It shouldn't have hurt, but I suffer from severe phantom limb pain, and I always subconsciously feel that my leg is still there. At this moment, even though Zhao Ziking was kicking my prosthetic, I still felt the pain in my right leg as if it were real. Liu Ryan stood up in a panic, her eyes filled with concern. It seemed like she wanted to help me, but the next second, Zhao Ziking said, "He Zhang, it looks like you're really in pain. This is your fault. Here I was feeling sorry for you, and you turned out to be lying. You're really something. No wonder Ryan, so smart, was still tricked by you back then." His words reminded Liu Ryan of how I had once ruthlessly deceived and abandoned her. The concern and hesitation in her eyes were suddenly replaced by anger. She snorted coldly. "Some people never change. I actually hope you didn't lie to me, that the amputation is real. After all, seeing you suffer makes me happy." Liu Ryan and Zhao Ziking interlaced their fingers, not sparing me a single glance, and walked off. I stared at her healthy body, in a corner where she couldn't see. I smiled faintly. She still didn't know that in that abandoned factory, it was I who had cut off her leg for her. When the kidnapper uttered those words, I realized it was either money or blood. Otherwise, we wouldn't be leaving today. I looked at the girl in my arms, the one I swore to protect for life, and made a resolute decision. This time, I would protect her, no matter what. They sawed off my leg and threw me and Liu Ryan onto the street. I stared at her, who was asleep, for a long time. She loved me so much. When she woke up and saw me in this condition, she wouldn't reject me. She would only feel heartbroken and guilty, and then dedicate her life to taking care of me. But she was already so tired. The Liu family went bankrupt. Her father was critically ill, and her mother, under the blow, fell into mental illness. I couldn't be her burden anymore. As the sky began to lighten, I gritted my teeth and painfully crawled away. Because I had no money, I found a small clinic to quickly treat my wounds, without even anesthesia or painkillers. It was probably because I didn't receive proper treatment back then that I now suffer from various after effects. Liu Ryan never knew I went to save her. She thought the kidnappers finally realized that she was now penniless, with no ransom value, and they threw her by the roadside. Later, she desperately searched for me. On the wedding day, she wore a cheap wedding dress alone, crying and calling me many times. At that time, I lay in a dark basement, in so much pain that I wanted to smash my head against the wall and die. I endured the torment, coldly speaking into the phone. I've had enough. I've had enough of her family's bottomless pits. I've had enough of those days when I couldn't even afford the bus fare, walking 2 hours home on foot every day. I said I found a rich woman, hoping she would never come to find me again. I didn't want my girlfriend to misunderstand. I still remember how Liu Ryan, always so strong, cried so miserably back then. Hee Jong, I'll let you go. I will never look for you again. Suddenly, a sharp pain pierced through my right leg, interrupting my memories. I didn't notice when it started raining outside, since my leg was amputated. I've been especially sensitive to weather changes. Every time it rains, I have to sweat through the pain before it stops. I instinctively reached for the painkillers, but only found an empty bottle. I sat in my moldy-smelling home, listening to the fine raindrops, feeling the cramps in my leg. Desperately, I thought, I need to ask Liu Ryan for an advance on my salary to buy the painkillers. I called Liu Ryan, asking for the salary advance. And on the other end of the line, I heard a laugh. Is it really all about money? Then come here. Behave well and I'll agree to it. It was a private room in an upscale club. It was clearly a gathering of wealthy people, everyone dressed in gold and silver. The atmosphere was lively. Liu Ryan was surrounded in the middle, laughing and talking, while protecting Zhao Ziking. When she saw me, she suddenly waved her hand. Look, the drinker has arrived. If you want to drink, let him accompany you. Don't force my Ching to drink. He'll get drunk and I'll feel sorry for him. It turned out she wanted me to block alcohol for Zhao Ziking. Liu Ryan smiled, watching me intently. She knew I couldn't handle alcohol well, and probably wanted to see me make a fool of myself. But what she didn't know was that after leaving her for a long time, I turned to drinking, using it to drown my sorrows and numb the pain. I calmly downed 2 bottles of alcohol, which caused a round of applause from the surrounding people. Some even praised Liu Ryan. Where did you find such a good drinking companion? But Liu Ryan didn't take her eyes off me, her gaze complex and deep. I guess she must have been thinking, just a few years apart, how have I changed into someone she doesn't even recognize? Suddenly, Zhao Ziking let out a dramatic sigh, drawing Liu Ryan's attention away. He spoke in a wrong tone. Ryan, I think someone just touched me during the commotion. Liu Ryan glanced coldly at the rich women across from her, then suddenly smiled and pushed me over to them. Ching is mine. No one is allowed to touch him. Let these women play with you. He likes rich women anyway. As she said this, a flash of heartache seemed to cross her eyes, but the lighting in the room was too dim. I couldn't see clearly. I obediently drank, letting the rich women do whatever they wanted to me. I only hoped that Liu Ryan would show mercy and give me an advance on my salary. But she didn't seem happy at all, pouring drink after drink. Until the party finally ended, I lay drunk at the entrance of the club, mumbling incoherently, salary ... Ms. Liu ... Don't forget ... A high heel stopped in front of me. Liu Ryan's soft sigh reached my ears. What happened to you these years? Why are you so short of money? It hurts ... I need to buy painkillers. In that moment, I lost track of time, patting my leg with frustration. She paused for a moment, and then sneered. You're so drunk. Yet you still tried to lie to me. She bent down to lift up my pants leg. But my last ounce of reason made me hold my leg tight, not allowing her to see a thing. Her frantic voice echoed in my ears. Hee Jong, stop pretending. You don't want me to see, huh? Go check his medical records. Find the evidence of his lies. And when I do, I'll throw that evidence right in his lying face. Her high heels arrogantly walked away. But after a moment, she returned. She threw a stack of money on the ground. In the dim light, this time, Liu Ryan truly left and didn't look back at me. I got the money I needed and bought the medicine, but the rain hadn't stopped for days. My phantom limb pain kept flaring up, and it was getting worse. The regular painkillers weren't working anymore. I had to increase the dosage. Lately, work has been busy as well. Zhao Ziking landed on the country's biggest runway and had me running around doing his bidding. Whenever I had a moment of free time, I stared blankly at the screen backstage. Male models walked down the runway one after another. I unconsciously observed their catwalk, learning from their strengths. When I saw obvious mistakes, I couldn't help but wonder how I would have walked if it were me up there. Suddenly, my right leg seized up in pain, followed by a chilling, deep pain that pierced my bones. I shakily took out the painkillers, and just as I was about to take them, Zhao Ziking yelled, "Hejong, where have you been? Am I paying you to eat for nothing? Get over here right now!" Suddenly, Zhao Ziking grabbed me, slapping me repeatedly, forcing me to kneel and help him change his shoes. I endured all of this until he snatched my medicine away. I desperately grabbed a handful. Though I hadn't even touched him, he started whining. Suddenly, someone shoved me hard and shielded Zhao Ziking behind them. Liu Ryan anxiously checked if he was injured, and when she looked at me again, her eyes turned cold. She stared at my bottle of medicine and mocked, "Painkillers? Hejong, you're quite the actor, aren't you? Too bad my secretary already checked your medical records. The so-called amputation is all just nonsense." With those words, the bottle of medicine flew through the air and was tossed into the rain. The pain in my right leg intensified, and at that moment, I didn't think of anything. My body moved toward the medicine bottle. I was like a delirious beast, kneeling on the ground, trembling as I tried to pick it up. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't open it. Through the rain, I saw Liu Ryan's expression filled with intense pain, but in the blink of an eye, it turned into disgust. "Get up! You just want money, don't you? I'll give it to you. But get that pathetic look off your face. Stop pretending." She twisted open the bottle, but then she flicked her hand, and the pills tumbled into the rain. The tip of her shoe stepped on them, crushing them angrily. The corridor was filled with people. I heard them whispering behind their hands. How could a man be this useless? I heard Liu's family went into decline back then. He just turned around and walked away. Now he's getting what he deserves. Haha, he totally deserves it. Seeing this scumbag suffer like this, I feel satisfied. Liu Ryan probably thought the same. Dignity and the excruciating pain in my body were in conflict. The sound of rain and voices seemed to be cut off. I slowly bent down and tried to lick the rainwater mixed with the crushed pill remnants beneath Liu Ryan's feet. I wanted to live with dignity too, but I was really in so much pain. But before my lips could touch the ground, Liu Ryan finally couldn't take it anymore. With all her strength, she kicked me away. Enough! I collapsed helplessly in the rain, my body completely pierced by the cold pain. Before I lost consciousness, I faintly saw Liu Ryan's secretary hurriedly coming toward us. "Liu, I've checked. 3 years ago, Hejong's right leg was cut off by a group of people in the underworld. He later received simple treatment at a small clinic, so there's no medical record. I took people to raid their territory, and in the boss's office, we found many spoils of war. One of them was a small refrigerator, and underneath it written was your name." She pushed the small refrigerator toward Liu Ryan, slowly opened it, and everyone gasped in shock. Inside was a severed leg. The whole room fell silent for a long time. Only the sound of rain roared across the world. Liu Ryan seemed frozen, staring intently at the severed limb inside the fridge. She trembled faintly and unconsciously took a step toward the corridor. Her whole body was exposed to the rain. The heavy rain hid the redness at the corners of her eyes, and the shock and confusion swirling in her gaze. Someone covered their mouth and exclaimed, "Am I seeing this wrong? Is that really in the fridge? Wow! We live in a society governed by law now. This can't be real, right? Could it be a prop? Props are so realistic now." Amid the chatter, Zhao Ziking pushed his way through the crowd, walked over, bent down to examine it carefully, then suddenly laughed and shouted, "Not to say anything, Secretary Li. Your eyesight isn't great. This is clearly a fake prop. You actually brought this to Full Ryan? Or should I say, did he Zhang bribe you too? How much did he give you?" When these words reached her ears, Liu Ryan seemed to let out a breath, slowly regaining her heartbeat and senses. She frowned, and after seeing the confident look on Zhao Ziking's face, she looked at the secretary with doubt. The secretary froze and hurriedly said, "Ms. Liu, I haven't colluded with anyone, and I haven't lied. Based on my investigation, the facts are ... Before she could finish, Zhao Ziking interrupted her, giving her a threatening glare, then nervously glanced at me, lying in the rain. He then wrapped his arm around Liu Ryan's shoulder and pouted, "Darling, you're such a little fool. How many times will he Zhang have to deceive you before you learn your lesson? You're just too kind. That's why he keeps using you over and over again." As he spoke, the crowd around us sighed in relief, some even exaggeratedly clutching their chests. That scared me to death. Thank goodness it's not real. I almost threw up my dinner. Ha! This He Zhang is shameless. I've never seen someone so vile. To come up with such a trick just to gain sympathy. Yeah. Thank goodness Ms. Liu has Mr. Zhao by her side. Otherwise, she would have been hurt again. The chattering voices echoed in Liu Ryan's ears, each word reminding her of how I deceived and abandoned her back then. After a long pause, she looked at the severed leg one last time, turned coldly, and walked away. "He Zhang, stop pretending to be unconscious. Even if you die out here in the rain, I won't feel sorry for you one bit. Get up now." But she didn't know I had really passed out. After waiting for a long time with no reaction from me, Liu Ryan snorted coldly, took Zhao Ziking by the arm, and walked away. Not only that, but when the workday ended, she warned everyone not to help me. I'll see how long he can keep up this act. In fact, it was unnecessary for her to do that. After hearing about what happened years ago, everyone in the company hated me. No one would bother checking if I was really unconscious, or if I needed help. The rain lasted for a long time. Long enough that when I woke up in the middle of the night, the rain was still falling. I crawled up, shook my head, and it took a while to regain my senses. I might have a slight fever. My head felt heavy, but this actually made the pain in my leg subside a bit. I leaned against the wall and slowly made my way home, step by step. Since that day, Liu Ryan became absent-minded. She worked as usual, sitting at her computer every day, processing documents. She seemed no different from before. Until one day, Zhao Ziking complained that she wasn't spending enough time with him. When he leaned in, he unintentionally glanced at her search history on the computer. It was filled with rows of questions, all about amputation. How to tell if someone is wearing a prosthetic? Do people with prosthetics walk like normal people? What are the after effects of amputation? What should be paid attention to? Does it still hurt years after amputation? How should it be treated? Zhao Ziking's face instantly darkened. No wonder. He had been feeling like Liu Ryan had been looking at him with a certain intention recently. He stormed out of her office fuming and directed all his anger at me. "He Zhang, what are you doing? This coffee's cold. Go buy me another one." While I was changing his shoes, he suddenly kicked me hard in the chest. "I've told you 100 times. When you change my shoes, you need to kneel halfway. Put my foot on you while you change them. The worst time was when it was almost time to get off work. He suddenly said he wanted a cake from a shop in East Suburb. I don't want delivery. It gets all messed up during transport. Go buy it for me. You're not allowed to take the subway or a taxi. I won't let my cake be squished with everyone else's. You walk there and you walk back. I'll wait for you here. I want to see the cake before it gets dark. But from here to East Suburb, it takes an hour by car, let alone walking. I frowned and explained. But he just smirked. Stop making excuses. It's purely because you're bad at your job. Then just quit. Give me back the salary advance. Now, the others in the office glanced over, wanting to speak but holding back. They all felt that Zhao Ziking was being too much. But after all, he was the boyfriend of the CEO. No one dared to upset him. They all hurriedly wrapped up for the day. I clenched my fist. All right, I'll go now. The people leaving work streamed past me. I walked with heavy steps, alone on the road. To make sure I wasn't taking a car, Zhao Ziking kept calling me with video calls. Soon, night fell. I rubbed my aching legs. And because I had no money, I chose the cheapest prosthetic. Naturally, its function and craftsmanship weren't great. I walked a long way, and at this moment, the connection between my right leg and the prosthetic was rubbing painfully. I bent down to massage my leg, and only then did I realize. I didn't know when, but a car had been following me. I walked slowly, and it followed at an even slower pace. Through the car window, I met Liu Ryan's complicated gaze. After a long pause, she opened the car door and got in. Sitting in the soft back seat of the car, my leg finally started to relax. Liu Ryan's gaze kept falling on my leg, always hesitating to speak. The car was silent for a long time. Then she suddenly spoke softly. My father passed away not long after you ran away from our wedding. I froze. I looked at her delicate side profile, and the subtle pain in my heart began to rise. My mother was so affected that her condition worsened, and she was forcibly sent to a psychiatric hospital. At that time, I really wished someone could have been there for me. I told myself, if you came back now, I would forgive you. But you didn't come back. Later, Liu Ryan worked tirelessly to pay off debts, working in office buildings, dancing in nightclubs, driving a ride share, and even delivering food. In short, any way to make money. She tried it. One time, she fainted from exhaustion in front of her house. When she woke up, she thought, if I had you by my side now, I would forgive you. But I didn't have you. Later still, she finally paid off the money and began her own business. She fought hard in the business world and naturally had to endure many hardships. To win a contract, she drank herself to the point of stomach bleeding. At that moment, she thought, if I could have you by my side now, I would forgive you. As she spoke, Liu Ryan stared out the car window. Only half of her side profile visible to me. In these 3 years, I secretly let go more than 100 times, telling myself that if you came back now, I would forgive you. But you never came back. But for some reason, I stopped letting go. You came back. She smiled lightly, as if lamenting the unpredictability of fate, and then fell silent. Was she waiting for my response? I pursed my lips, carefully hiding the pain in my eyes, and replaced it with a playful, nonchalant tone. Come on, I was just a little late. Ms. Liu, you're magnanimous. Please give me another chance, okay? I promise I'll treat you better than Zhao Ziking ever did. Look, I even lost my leg. Just pity me. How about it 745? The pressure in the car seemed to drop a few degrees suddenly. Liu Ryan tensed up, her anger palpable. At this point, you're still lying? Pull over. Get out. I obediently rolled out of the car, watching the silver Maserati drive off. Only then did a bitter smile appear on my face. Liu Ryan had always been a strong girl. Without me, she was still getting better on her own. And what about me? Hey, what right did I have to disturb her? by the time I bought the cake and slowly made my way back to the office. It was already 4 a.m. Zhao Ziking was long gone. I had no choice but to place the cake in the fridge in his break room. Looking at my right leg, torn and bleeding, I sighed. I hailed a cab to go home. I thought this matter would just pass. But to my surprise, the next day when I arrived at the office, Zhao Ziking directly slammed the cake into my face. I didn't say I wanted to see the cake before dark. His words seemed to disappear into thin air. He Zhang, your workability is really terrible. You should resign yourself. This half-month counts as a trial period without pay. Give me back all the salary advances. I looked up at him in disbelief, still wanting to argue. But suddenly, someone grabbed me, and someone else forcefully pressed my knee, forcing me to kneel. The other colleagues in the company saw from a distance, some laughing, some watching the drama, and some showing pity in their eyes. But all they did was shake their heads and sigh. In this company, no one respected me. They all knew that it was I who had abandoned Liu Ryan years ago because of her family's poverty. So every time they talked about me, it was either mockery or disdain. Naturally, no one came to my rescue now. Zhao Ziking directly led people to beat me up. You piece of trash! When you left back then, you should have stayed away. What's this about coming back now? Stop talking about amputation and all that nonsense. I warn you. Leave on your own. Don't show up in front of Ryan again. When others talk about amputation, it's always with mockery. Because they don't believe me. Only Zhao Ziking, when talking about it, is filled with guilt and fear. In the midst of the pain, I suddenly realized that when Zhao Ziking looked at the severed leg, he must have realized it was real. He believed I had really lost my leg, but he was still deliberately slandering me for lying. Anger and hatred surged from my heart. I desperately grabbed his leg and tripped him. Then I took the chance to punch him again and again with all my strength. I may not deserve to be by Liu Ryan's side, but someone like you, a dark-hearted little man, doesn't deserve it either. The whole office echoed with the sound of my roaring and shouting. Suddenly, a cold female voice said, "Whether he deserves it or not, I decide. It's not your place to meddle. Who are you to me?" I froze, looking up at Liu Ryan, who was leaning against the door. It felt like a bucket of cold water had been poured over me. Suddenly, someone took advantage of my distraction and grabbed my leg violently, trying to drag me down, but they used too much force. I only tried to run for a moment, and then I heard a ripping sound. Before I could process what had happened, I saw Liu Ryan staring at my right leg, her eyes widening in shock. The pant leg of my right leg had been ripped off. My prosthetic leg was exposed to the air, and because it was a prosthetic, I remained unaware and numb until I looked down and realized what had happened. The next moment, Liu Ryan's eyes seemed to tear apart. She rushed over, pushing everyone aside, and when she saw the connection between my right leg and the prosthetic, her eyes went red with emotion. Her lips trembled for a while, and she finally managed to squeeze out a broken, almost inaudible, "He Zhang, does it hurt?" At the hospital bed, Liu Ryan seemed to revert to the little girl she had been back then, her hands tightly clutching the hem of my shirt, listening to the doctor's words. The tears never stopped. Mr. He's leg wasn't properly treated at the time. The damage was too severe. Phantom limb pain has been left untreated. Ordinary medication can no longer help. The wound is also slightly infected. That prosthetic is already useless. No wonder the pain flares up on rainy days. How could it have been neglected for so many years? Liu Ryan hurriedly urged the doctor, whether it's medication, or or surgery. I don't care how much it costs. Just make sure he feels better. As long as he can recover quickly. Arrange everything immediately. I wanted to say it wasn't necessary, but she pressed me firmly onto the hospital bed. Such a delicate girl. I didn't know where she found such strength, but she made me take the medicine, get the injection, and finally undergo the debridement surgery. When I woke up, she was asleep by my bedside. It seemed like she had been crying. Her eyes were red and swollen. The tip of her nose was also bright red. Her hands tightly gripped mine, as if she were in a dream of loss and recovery. The sunlight fell on her delicate profile, her hair surrounded by a soft golden glow. I couldn't help but sigh in contentment. For me, wasn't this also a dream of loss and recovery? When Liu Ryan woke up and saw that I was awake, she couldn't help but cry again. I wiped away her tears, but couldn't wipe away the pain in her eyes. Hee-jong, you're the biggest fool in the world. I smiled. Not too bad. I'm not that foolish, am I? You're not pretending anymore? Before, you used to call me Ms. Liu every time. I shrugged helplessly. Yeah, I'm not pretending anymore. I was afraid of getting hit if I kept pretending. Liu Ryan finally broke into a smile. It felt like the misunderstandings and distance of the past 3 years had suddenly melted away. I didn't have to worry about whether I deserved to be with her, or if I should stay away from her. And she didn't need to ask me why I didn't look for her all these years, or if I still wanted to be with her. We only needed to look at each other, and it seemed like we found the answer. We lay together in bed, and she softly talked to me, telling me about her experiences over the years. Do you know? Actually, I started this modeling company for you. I thought since you always wanted to be a model, I figured if I became the best company in the industry, I'd have a chance to meet you. Before, when I said I hoped you wouldn't do well, it was just out of anger. I've always blamed you. But deep down, I've always silently prayed for your well-being. I've worked so hard these years. I thought since you love money, when I finally had money, maybe you'd come back to me. And as for Zhao Ziking, our relationship is rather complicated. He's my partner's brother. I originally wanted to help him rise, so I signed him to my company. When rumors spread that we were a couple, I didn't clarify it for his exposure. Not long ago, one day, he suddenly said he wanted to try with me. I hesitated for a while, but the moment you showed up, I was a bit shaken. And in a moment of weakness, I agreed to him. And I told her how I had been fighting against the pain all these years. I told her how I had turned to drinking, not just to numb the pain. And I drank to the point that, while drunk, I could see her again in dreams or hallucinations. While speaking, the hospital corridor suddenly became noisy. Ryan, where are you? Is it really for that scum that you don't want me anymore? It was Zhao Ziking's voice. Zhao Ziking had always been spoiled at home, and when he entered society, he was still treated the same way. In the hospital, naturally, he wasn't one to follow rules. The nurses couldn't stop him at all. In no time, he burst into the hospital room. But as soon as the door opened, he saw Liu Ryan's ashen face, and his expression suddenly turned cold. The nurse looked embarrassed. Sorry, Ms. Liu. I couldn't stop him. It's fine. Liu Ryan smiled and shook her head at her. And when she turned to look at Zhao Ziking, her expression became serious. Let's make this clear in front of Hee-jong. Liu Ryan broke up with Zhao Ziking. From the very beginning, she had been asked by his sister to look after him, and later to provoke me. She ended up with him. She explained all of this to him sincerely. I'm sorry, but since 8 years ago, I've always loved Hee-jong, and that hasn't changed. Her voice was so firm, so certain, that my heart felt like it had been gently bumped, and it became warm and full. Zhao Ziking, however, looked unwilling. All this for that bastard? Smack! Before he could finish, Liu Ryan furrowed her brows and slapped Zhao Ziking across the face. You've bullied Hee-jong repeatedly, but I won't hold it against you. From now on, I hope you'll show him some respect. It seemed like Liu Ryan was determined to back me up. Not only did she confront Zhao Ziqing in the hospital, but after returning to the office, she also changed my position to executive assistant to the CEO and publicly announced that we would be getting engaged. She hoped everyone would respect me, just as they respected her. The crowd looked shocked, and whispers filled the air. Wasn't he Zhang the one who betrayed Ms. Liu before? Ms. Liu looks like such a strong woman. How could she be so caught up in romance? Shh. Quiet down, don't say that. There were hidden reasons back then. Didn't you hear Zhang got into a fight with them? His pants got torn. His right leg is a prosthetic. Yeah, I heard it was for Ms. Liu. No wonder she's never forgotten him after all these years. Honestly, Zhang has treated Ms. Liu quite well. The company's public opinion gradually calmed down. But then, on a rainy night, he stood on the rooftop of a tall building, pretending to be ready to jump. He contacted a whole bunch of reporters, claiming I was the mistress, that I had abandoned Liu Ryan for being poor, and now I was back to steal his girlfriend. Before, Liu Ryan had been trying so hard to support him, and now he had gained some fans and a bit of fame. For a moment, the scandal of me being the mistress and Liu Ryan cheating spread across the entire internet. Later, someone posted a video from the opening day, in which the grinning me and the icy Liu Ryan formed a stark contrast. Some people sighed. How could Liu Ryan have such bad taste? What's so good about this guy? How could she leave Zhao Ziqing and be with him? Others cursed me, shouting, "This guy's all skin and bones. He's obviously just a pure mistress's man." After much hesitation, Liu Ryan decided to hold a press conference to clarify the facts. She wanted me to attend with her to explain what had happened back then. Naturally, I had no objections, but I didn't expect that. When I arrived at the conference, the place was filled with flowers, decorated with ribbons and our old photos. Under the gaze of countless cameras, Liu Ryan walked toward me in a wedding dress, smiling. When I took a closer look, I realized it was the same wedding dress she had worn back then. We were so poor at the time. We bought the fabric and white tulle ourselves, and asked several designer friends to help make the wedding dress. She had kept it all this time. Liu Ryan smiled at me. I don't care what others say about me. I just didn't want you to suffer. On the side, her secretary had already begun showing the reporters evidence, explaining what happened 3 years ago. Suddenly, Liu Ryan slid a diamond ring onto my ring finger. We missed our wedding 3 years ago, but now, I want everyone to witness this moment. I'm going to propose to you again. Marry me. Through health and sickness, through being whole or broken, through wealth or poverty, I will love you faithfully, forever, never to part. The room erupted in thunderous applause, and some people even wiped away tears. After I nodded, Liu Ryan smiled and took my hand. Come with me. I've got a surprise for you. Liu Ryan dragged me out of the conference hall, and to accommodate me, she ran slowly until we stood in front of a grand building. I froze. This was the largest runway in the country, where countless famous fashion shows had been held. With her encouragement, I walked inside. I pushed open the door. Under the dazzling lights, the long runway practically gleamed. The rhythmically modern music began to play. Liu Ryan gently pushed at my lower back. Want to give it a try? She had consulted many people, and with my condition, if I recovered well enough, I could actually return to the runway. If that didn't work, I could still participate in special fashion shows for disabled people. At this moment, the audience seats were empty. The only gaze on me came from Liu Ryan. Her eyes were full of encouragement, protection, and acceptance. And with that, I could step onto the runway without any hesitation. It had been 3 years since I last walked. At first, I was very awkward, often missing the rhythm, even swaying side to side. But gradually, it seemed like I started to catch a feeling. And under Liu Ryan's bright gaze, I walked from the end of the runway, quickly making my way toward her. I squatted down, letting her hold my face. Hee-jong, you've made it. Though my catwalk still fell short of the standard, in the eyes of my lover, even the broken me could become a priceless treasure. After that day, the voices of public opinion gradually quieted. People shifted from endless humiliation and insults to blessings and support. As for Zhao Ziking, he was so heavily criticized that he withdrew from the modeling industry and hid in his home, too afraid to go out. Later, Liu Ryan arranged many rehabilitation treatments for me. The phantom limb pain disappeared, and I received the most expensive prosthetic leg. The skin texture looked so realistic, and it was incredibly comfortable. Occasionally, I'd space out, thinking I had never lost my leg. Day after day of rehabilitation and catwalk training, the young man with a bright future seemed to truly return. On the day Liu Ryan and I got married, I received countless blessings. Some wished me to never suffer from pain again. Others wished me lifelong happiness. Liu Ryan's mother also came. Her mental state had improved a lot. Though speaking was still a bit difficult for her, she tried hard to hold Liu Ryan's hand. She placed it in the palm of my hand, then gently patted me, trying to make her voice as clear as possible. Little he, you are a good child. You too will be happy. Liu Ryan and I exchanged a glance, and in each other's eyes, we saw tears. We will be happy. That day, I also received a special gift. During the ring exchange, Liu Ryan slipped an invitation letter into my palm and motioned for me to open it. It turned out to be an invitation to a domestic fashion show. They had heard of my story and had seen my recent runway performances and decided to invite me to walk for them. Honestly, I wasn't yet at the level to be walking at such a prestigious show. Most likely, they were attracted by my social media following, but I was still deeply grateful. After 3 years, I finally returned to a formal fashion show. That day, Liu Ryan was even more excited than me. She didn't care about the image of the CEO and cheered and clapped wildly from the audience. Later, I became more and more skilled. My progress became more and more apparent. I went to Milan's fashion show, and later still, I became a regular at major fashion weeks. One late night after work, Liu Ryan had finished an important meeting and flew straight to Paris to find me. I opened my coat and wrapped her in my arms, shielding her from the cold night air. She poked at my chest and smiled, pulling at her lips. How come you don't call me Ms. Liu anymore? I chuckled. How long has it been? How can you still hold a grudge? I not only hold grudges, but I'll hold it against you for a lifetime. What I didn't know was, during those 3 lost years, Liu Ryan had been working tirelessly every day and night, trying to keep me in her heart. Whether it was love, or hate, or even regret, she carefully swallowed it all. Thinking back, she never wanted to forget me. She wanted to remember me for life. Hate lasts longer than love. If love couldn't last that long, then let it be hate. But when we reunited that day, she realized there are some kinds of love that can't be worn down, even if it's weathered by time, even if it's wrapped in hate. She asked, back then, you ran away because my family went bankrupt. You left me behind. And now you suddenly appear. Are you regretting it? At that moment, she felt her heart soften, and if I said yes, she would forgive me.